possibly their interest in the presentation today.
Right.
So
But
I
I'm
wonder
only
if we
seeing
could,
one department director.
if,
Two, three. Okay, sorry.
and we also, yeah. So I don't know, do we want to get a quick report from department directors and then move into yours, or does anybody have anything earth-shaking from the departments to report before we go to the RC&D portion? Or?
No, I'm back full time.
You're back full time?
I am.
Oh, good.
Oh, I got it.
We got it.
Got it. All the way around?
And okay, I guess we didn't have any left anyway.
Okay. Well, we're pleased to have Dr. George Haines here today from MSU. He's one of about 6 specialists that's been in the county since I've been here, and so they don't get out this far that often. So we're real pleased to have him here today. He's with the Department of Consumer Economics. Well, no, that's your PhD, Consumer Economics from Cornell, and he's in our Ag Econ department there at MSU. So he's very involved with. If you've ever been to one of the Bureau of Business and Economic Research, you've heard him speak there. He's involved with the Bakken, looking at the numbers there and what the impacts of that are for our state. He's working with Montana Manufacturing Extension Center, looking at industry and that kind of thing in the state. So we've asked him to come here today to talk about Montana's aging population, and I guess I was hopeful that we'd have more of the department heads here, because to me it has policy implications. It's our future. I'm glad to see the hospitals here today, because definitely it impacts. For the sake of our speaker, I thought we could go around the room real briefly and just introduce ourselves and who we represent today. So I'm Kevin Chamberlain. I'm the MSU Extension Agent here in Mineral County. Dennis?
I'm Dennis Hildebrand. Mostly I'm just Joe citizen, but I stay involved with a lot of things, and I'm here.
Roger Hearst, Mineral County Fire Warden.
I'm Chad Benson. I'm the District Ranger for the 9-Mile Ranger District with the Forest Service.
Jim?
I'm Jim Debris, retired from the University System.
Steve Carty, CEO of Mineral Community Hospital and Mineral Regional Health Center.
Jim Ward, working fire management at the Ranger District here in Superior, representing the District Ranger today.
Welcome. Ernie?
Ernie Ornales, the Sheriff Corner from Mineral County.
I'm Mary Arnold, Mineral County Treasurer, Superintendent of Schools.
Nancy Wilson, private citizen, and also one of the aging population members.
So somebody all aspire.
I'm Amy Farris, mostly private citizen, but I also am on the board chair of the hospital. I wasn't necessarily representing the hospital today, but.
I'm Wanda James. I'm the Justice of the Peace and the judges for the little towns of Alberton and Superior.
Mr. Cameraman, sir?
Mark Grimm, camera person.
He's also on the airport board.
Yes.
Sharron Patterson. Roy Johnston.
Logan Jalali.
Dwayne Simons. Thank you. And with that, we'll hand it over to George.
Okay.
Thanks again for being here.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me come out to Superior today. I actually grew up in central Montana, and so that's some of my interests actually in this study of the aging population in the state here. Why do you think this aging population issue matters in Montana? Anybody thought about that? Or, you know, what's going on in Mineral County here as part of the state? Why does this issue really matter to anybody? Okay.
Health costs, economic opportunities.
Okay, health costs, economic opportunity, tax base. We're going to talk about each one of those, at least part of each one of those topics. Okay, anything else? Yeah, we're of the opinion at MSU, at least, that it was a significant topic to talk about, only because Montana is becoming one of the oldest states in the Union. We have some counties in Montana that already are some of the oldest counties. They don't happen to be in western Montana, but they're over east of here, up in Daniels and Sheridan County, up in the northeastern part of the state. But Montana is going to become the 4th largest, oldest state in the Union as we approach 2030, at least with the population projections that we have. So it's become a really critical issue, and as we're going to talk about this from a kind of a demography sort of perspective, but then we'll talk a little bit about fiscal issues as we move through this as well. But we're primarily going to talk about demographics and migration and and then talk a little bit about some of the fiscal issues that go along with this. One of the really important parts about this as we move through this is that what's happened in Montana, as well as a lot of western states, that we have been the beneficiaries of something called a demographic dividend over the last decade or so. And we'll talk about what that demographic dividend means and how that's kind of playing itself out here as we look at these population statistics for the state. These are just all the people that helped us put this together. This is actually our second run of this. We did one of these for the Montana legislature in 2008, and then we did this also for the legislature in 2012. We did our major presentation this last fall. Oh, hopefully this works. There we go. So this is kind of the topics we're going to hit on as we go through this over the next hour or so. If you want to interrupt me and ask some questions, feel free to do that. I'm married and have kids, so I'm doing sort of things. Okay, we're going to start off just talking about some of the demographic issues. We're going to get into a little bit of kind of some ways we analyze this, to think about from a little bit broader perspective, and then we'll talk a little bit about this on a county-wide basis. Here's the most important graph probably of all of them here. This is kind of work through this piece at a time here. Let's take the yellow bars that are down that we start off with. The yellow ones are what's happened to our young people in Montana. These are people 17 years of age. Or actually, people are younger than 18. And as you look at this, as we go back to, let's go back ways to 1930, but as we move across here, we had this increasing number of young people, and this isn't percentage, it's actually numbers of young people in Montana. Look what's happened since 1960 going forward. We've moved from around 250,000 or so 0 to 17-year-olds, and we've moved, it's been a steady decline down to 2010, and it looks like it's going to stabilize probably as we go out to kind of 2030. So we have this declining number of young people, and we all know that in these smaller communities. The little school I grew up in, we had about 40 in high school when I was there, and now this past year we have 6 or 8 kids that are there. And most of the kids that are in from foreign countries that are just allowing us to get some money from some state support. Okay, let's look at the green bar here, and this is kind of where one of the important stories is in Montana, because we have this, these are the working age population people here, people that actually have jobs and not on transfer payments. So we had this was pretty steady across time, and then we ended up in the 1970s. We had this increase. Look at this increase as we moved from kind of 1970 to the present, to 2010. And then look at these projections going forward. More people are going to be retiring out. So what we're doing is we're losing this working base right here. People are actually in the labor force. Now we can solve that a little bit by increasing this number up here. We move from, in fact in my case, it's bumped up a little bit above 65, but we're not going to make any huge changes in this picture just because of that. Okay, the other and most important story we're going to talk about today, actually, look at these elderly numbers. We had very few elderly people living in Montana back in the 1930s, and as we move forward, look at these numbers. They've moved from, down here to the 12,000, 15,000 range up here to where we have around 280,000 elderly here in the state of Montana. So now it turns out this is a really important state as well as, national federal question as well. We're not going to spend very much time on the federal side of this today, other than we'll talk about Medicaid, but really important implications, as we all know, with Social Security and Medicare in particular.
Question?
Yes?
I was under the assumption that our population had 1 million.
We're just just a shade below 1 million right now.
That doesn't reflect it there.
Well, pretty much it should add up to that, though.
Oh, it does?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're going to have 3 groups of people here. So we have our young people, our middle-aged people, our working-age people, and then our older people. And it adds, we're just a shade under 1 million still as we sit today, actually. So if we break this out as kind of a percentage, you kind of get the same story as before. In some respects, we had this, let's go back to 1970, about 35% of our population were people that were under 18 years of age. A little over 50% were a working age population, and then these elderly comprised about 10%. Let's look out to our projections in 2030 out here. These young people become a smaller percentage of the group. Working age population, again, a smaller percentage of the total. And then this elderly group increasing percent. In fact, we're up to about a quarter of Montana's population are people that are 65 years of age and older.
So I have a question on that. You know, as you project that out to 2030, 2040, 2050, somewhere along the line, that older population is going to stabilize because they're going to be dying off. So how is that going to be reflected in the other two charts also, because they're all ratio percentages, you know, of each other?
Well, as you know, one of the things that's going on is that people are living longer, though, and we get this population, especially people over 80 years old, are now living much longer than they used to before. So that we get these death rates. These death rates for people in those age groups are going down. So if you extend this out, there are some 2040 projections that are out there. And these 2040 projections kind of do a little bit what you're talking about. They kind of even out a little bit as we get out a little bit further. And the young people story in Montana actually improves just a bit as we get out to 2040 as well. So, but you're right. You will plateau out there a little bit because we're not going to get huge increases likely in the the average age of people are likely to live. I think that's probably true, unless there's some changes in technology that come along. Okay, the one way that we look at these is to look at these dependency ratios. And what a dependency ratio is the number of people in our particular group divided by the people who are still working in the population. So we end up we have one of those for the young people and one for the old folks. So we'll talk about those here just briefly. We calculate the one for the young folks, young people, by taking the people that are under 18 and divided by the people that are working age, those that are 18 to 64. And then we do the same thing for the elderly population, except that the numerator this time is those people that are 65 years of age and older. And this is what these dependency ratios look like. And again, this we can go back to 1930 again here, and you'll notice that there's been a substantial change in what goes on with the young people. We have a dependency ratio there of about 0.6, and now that's dropped down to around 0.35 or so here as we're in 2000, essentially right now. And that's going to bump up just a bit as we move a little forward into 2030. But the reason it's going to go up is for not such a good reason. It's not that we're getting more young people in Montana, it's that we're losing this working age population. Same story with our elderly population here as well. Let's just look at this bar out here on the right. It started off in 1970 here with this about 85%, or 0.85. It declined through time here. And then because we had this working age population that was getting bigger and bigger as we moved through that period of time. As we get 2010 here, this is going to increase, and again, for two major reasons. One of them, we're becoming older, and secondly, we have fewer people that are in this working age population again. So we have this demographic dividend that we enjoyed all these years right through here, and we're now losing. And we're losing it on the young people's side, and we're losing it on the old people's side. So it becomes a bit of a challenge for us, I think. You look at this across Montana, it's a little hard to see with the lights here, but if we can turn the lights down, it might be a good idea. So everybody doesn't fall asleep. We'll turn it back on here in a minute. So, but if you look at this map of Montana, this is for the young people here, the youth dependency ratio here. And where do you see the really dark pieces of this map? Is there any relationship between any of these darker spots? Yeah, these are American Indian reservations. They actually comprise almost 15% of the kids in public schools today. So on the Indian reservations, it's a little bit different story because we have this really substantial growth of young people and a working age population that hasn't changed so much there, but really a lot of young people there. If we fast forward this now to look at 2030, this map becomes dark across the entire state almost. If you notice over here, Monroe County actually has a relatively low youth dependency ratio. Rest of the state becomes very dark, or a lot of the eastern part of the state does, and again, it's because of the wrong reasons. It's because we end up with having this working age population is getting smaller. We're not getting more kids out there. A high youth dependency ratio is a good thing normally. Because you're thinking about your young people, the base of young people is getting bigger, but that is not what's going on in North Dakota. The elderly map looks a little bit, a lot of relatively low sort of elderly dependency ratios in western Montana for sure. Mineral County over here is a little bit of an anomaly, if you notice. You're actually pretty dark over here in relation to your neighbors. Again, same story as we fast forward to 2030, this map gets pretty dark again. And for two reasons. Getting older, and this working age population is getting smaller, so we're losing on both sides. A new clicker today, excuse me here, I'll sort it out here. Okay, but one of the really important factors is migration in Montana. And anybody want to guess what's happening with Montana migration?
They're leaving.
Yeah, people are leaving, but not everybody's leaving. But we're losing some pretty key groups as decide to move on. We're going to look at migration across kind of three different areas here. We'll take a look at western and southern Montana, which kind of seem to move together. This is kind of going through the hood, if you will, down from across the western part of the state down to Billings. We'll take a little bit look at Yellowstone County by itself, and then we'll talk just a little bit about eastern Montana, which is an interesting story in itself. And here's Montana migration. You notice everybody thinks everybody's leaving Montana, but what's happening is that we're losing some really key pieces of people that are going out of Montana. Now this migration that's here, this is all out-of-state migration. And it's all these people you'd like to have in your workforce, or at least be training in your workforce. People that are kind of in their early 20s to people in their early 30s. And we actually have in-migration, a little bit of immigration as we kind of move out beyond that. But we're losing this really key group of people right here where we have really high expectations for, at least. These people right here are really children of people that are out here. So don't misread this. It's kind of just children of people that might be out here a little bit further.
How do you compensate then for, or maybe it's not a significant factor, as people get older and they are retiring from their jobs, but they still stay involved in volunteerism and take up some of the slack that we don't have funds to pay people for?
Well, we'll talk about that when we get toward the end of this presentation, because I think it's really an important contribution. I mean, also, you think about elderly workforce. What are the advantages for an employer hiring somebody that's already got Social Security and Medicare? Yeah, you don't have to pay them as much. You don't have to cover. They really don't care about being invested in your retirement plan, and they really don't care about medical care. And so you get these advantages in here. In addition to that, this number of people that are available to do these jobs that nobody else would do otherwise. And how willing people are to step up and do some of that's another question. But in some communities, there's a lot of that occurs. Okay, the migration story, now this migration picture changes just a little bit, because this is just migration out of the region here, and it could be migrating to, out to eastern Montana, to the Bakken, or wherever. But notice the western Montana migration is not such a big deal. Now, I don't know if that reflects what's happened here. In talking to Kevin this morning, it sounds like there's been more out migration maybe from Mineral County than this would represent here. But this is throughout all of western and southern Montana, kind of down to the Yellowstone County border. In a little bit, it's kind of the same age group, just a little bit older age group here, but really pretty insignificant migration that's occurred there. Yellowstone County is kind of its own story just because it's so much more economic activity there than any place else in Montana, even with the Bakken going on over in Richland County. But again, just a little bit of out-migration here, but this is really, almost kids that are likely moving from Yellowstone County up to the University of Montana or Montana State to go to school. So not really very much additional out-migration from Yellowstone County that matters here. This is where I grew up. And things are really dismal out in eastern Montana. There's been a huge exodus of people, and especially a huge exodus of people in these age groups that you really care about here. Again, same ones we talked about in general for Montana, but from about 18 to the early 30s, people are leaving in droves. And the tough part about it is that not many of them are coming back. So we see these communities are just getting smaller and smaller by the day. And so a really significant problem as we look at what's going on with demographics in general, and has a lot to do with their story that's really critical to eastern Montana and what we're talking about here today, just because of this continual drain of people living in that part of the state. Okay, let's get into the numbers here. We'll talk about this from really a state and local appropriations is really what this is about, because this is a study done for the Montana legislature. So we really weren't very concerned. We can talk just a little bit about Medicaid in a while here, but we're not very concerned about federal money at the moment, even though we'll allude to it here soon. But we're really talking about state and local government finances or appropriation. And we'll look at it across about what we consider to be about 70% of appropriations in the state that are out of K-12 and higher education, corrections, Medicaid, and then we'll look at the other side of the equation with the revenue side here at the bottom of this. So we'll get about 70% of what we appropriate in the state of Montana. Now these are all on a per Montana basis. We just take all the state budgeting numbers, we divide them by the population of Montana, which is about 1 million people. And we have total taxes that turn out to be about almost $3,600 per person here. That's broken up between property and individual income taxes, transfers from the federal government, which we're not going to spend very much time talking about today. The real growth area actually in Montana taxation and on this side of the equation here has been in charges and fees over the last couple of decades. Then we have these miscellaneous government revenues, and then we get down into the liquor stores and utilities and that sort of stuff, and other money that flows into Montana. And the total down here of revenues that, when it all nets out, around $7,300 or so per person. Over here on the expenditure side, there's also some big players over here, and the big one, this is what's going on in the Montana legislature right now, is education. The big player in education really is K-12, when you think about it from an appropriations perspective, because we at the university, even though we're a important player in this, we can adjust our tuition and we can go out and get grants and contracts and other stuff to help support ourselves. K-12 can't do that sort of thing. So they're really dependent upon state government appropriations, and we'll see how important that is here momentarily. And then social services, we're going to talk a little bit in here about corrections and about and some of the medical issues that have to do with Medicare, or Medicaid, excuse me. And then just a whole other list here. Those add up when we get to the bottom line here of about, around $8,600 or so per person in Montana.
So we're in the hole.
So we're just a little bit running in the hole this week. But we'll see we'll see how this plays out over time.
I have a quick question then too, if you flip back to that please. On that first column there where it says subtotal general revenues, you have 8,025. I just did a quick mental thing and it's between 12 and 13, so somebody didn't add their numbers up.
Well, don't add, you have to be careful though, as you add those numbers up here. You're going to get 35 here, and then all these numbers here add into the total taxes.
Oh, it's double different.
Yeah, so then you got to go, you need to go down a little further. So hopefully it adds up okay. So yeah, these numbers here, these are all part of this. They're already totaled up here, so you don't want to add those in.
So that was good.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to spend most of our time talking about it, as I suggested before, really on the demographic side of this, but we'll also get some other financial issues as we move through this. But we're going to assume all financial flows are in $2010 dollars. That's the data we got available when we report together a few months ago. We're going to assume participation rates are the same. So what I mean by participation rates is the percentage of people that are 0 to 17 that actually go to high school, or the percentage of people in certain age groups that are incarcerated or sitting over in Deer Lodge or down in Pine Hills or something. Expenditures per participant are going to remain the same as well. We'll talk about that here in a minute. We're not going to get into tax policy. Tax policy really is not so much a state issue as it is a federal issue anyhow. And then we're going to talk just a little bit about trends, but we're going to leave that out of the equation here for the next few minutes, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit about fiscal trends later on. So here's what K-12 looks like in Montana. We spend about $1.5 billion on K-12. Turned out in 2009-10, these are the last numbers that we had from OPI for this particular study. We had about 142,000 students in Montana. 88% of the kids that were 5 to 17, essentially less than 18, were participating in school. So it turned out the expenditure per student around $10,500, or about $1,500 per Montana was going into K-12. The K-12s, as we'll see, is the real heavyweight.
That total expenditures strictly state dollars?
Yeah, this is all state dollars right here. Yep, this is all state of right here. In terms of the Montana population that's participating, or that the percent of Montana population that's in this age group, you notice as we talked about before, it's smaller. In 2010, we had a little over 16% of our total population that was kind of high school age. As we go to 2030, that's going to drop down almost a 4 percentage point, not quite, about 0.9%. So what's the impact of that then on K-12 expenditures for Montana? Right now, we're sitting at this number of around $1,500. That's actually going to be a little bit of improvement. We're actually going to spend less money, at least our forecast is, on K-12 as we go out to 2030. Now, we got to be a little bit careful with that, because one of the things that's happened, as we'll see here in a little while, has been even though the population of students in Montana has actually gone down, we've been on a pretty substantial increase in funding for K-12 education, because we've had, it cost you about the same amount to run this high school over here, at least for the physical structure and so on. And to some degree, your teachers that are working there, as it does, whether you have 100 students that are going there, whether you have 50. So there's those issues associated with kind of lumpy expenditures like that.
And is that cost, say the $1,500 cost, is that just counting the day-to-day operations of educating a student that's on a school day, or does that also include the other things involved with education, such as the workers' compensation or retirement plan?
This takes in all the money that's appropriated for K-12 education is in these numbers that are here. And when you talk about this, it'll include all your work. Immediately we go into payroll and get into it would include the contributions that go into the trust fund that's going to pay these, to handle retirement. That would be what would be appropriate, would be identified in the numbers that we have. So what's happened, we don't need to spend too much time on the top part of this, but let's look at the bottom part of this. This has been the annual increase in student expenditures as we go across time, and we've done it for several time periods here. The largest increase occurred from 1970 to the 1980s. It actually went up by about 4.2%, a little bit faster than the federal, than U.S.-wide. So you get out here and look at the entire time frame from 1970 to the current time, and we've been increasing at about 2.3% a year. But keep in mind that over this entire period of time, we've actually had student numbers have been going down. But expenditures on K-12 are actually been going up, and we haven't been very different than the U.S. as a whole. Although the U.S. as a whole, if you look across all states, of course, there's been some increase in the number of students that are there rather than decline. So this is one of the issues, in fact, on the debate going on in Helena right now with respect to some of the new school funding formulas. I've been very concerned about some of the escalation in costs that have been realized over the last really since almost 4 decades.
What's causing that?
Well, just the general cost of keeping all this infrastructure going is a big part of that. Just keeping your buildings going, teacher salaries have increased over time. All this inflation in costs, and it turns out that, as I said before, there's not a lot of efficiencies gained as these schools get smaller. You end up with spending about the same base budget, regardless of whether you have 100 students there or whether you have 50. So there's all those the very lumpy or, fixed costs that are part of the system.
Would there be a factor from World War II and baby boom that they had to increase their infrastructure after World War II, and now that is starting to deteriorate and have to put another boost in? Because that's about the timeline that you got in there, is the high school, the baby boomers that turn into grandparents.
Well, that's right. I mean, we had this big, this big increase in the number of students that were in our system, up till about 1960 or so. Then it started to tail off going the other way. And so, yeah, we're trying to maintain these assets in some respect. That's an important part of the cost of it being spent.
Percentage also include federal mandated services that are not funded to bids that the state has to pick up?
This is just only state appropriated money.
State appropriated.
Yeah, this is just state appropriated money. So that wouldn't be a part of our numbers there. The university system now is the second part of the education piece. You notice the university piece is a lot smaller. We're about $1.5 billion for K-12, and we're about $160 million here for the university system. This includes money that's plugged in from the counties as well. So we get the state appropriation of about $150 million or so. The local, Miles City, Miles Community College and Dawson and Flathead Valley and so on, they kick in some money as well. About 31,000 students that are out there. Participation rate of people who are 18 to 24, about 33%. Now you might laugh at this because if you walk the MSU campus, you'll notice there's a lot of people there that are not 18 to 24 anymore, so a lot of older students coming back to school. But anyway, on a per student basis, we spend about $5,000. And expenditures for Montana are much smaller, about $162 per person in Montana for higher education. And again, it's just a different story because higher education has a lot more flexibility in state appropriated money because of increases in tuition primarily. If the state doesn't give us money, then we lobby for increases in tuition to cover the bill. So what about this 18 to 24 population? Well, you notice really some substantial changes here. And right now, we're about 9.6% of the state population is 18 to 24. As we get out to 2030, only about 8% of that. So a substantial decline in those numbers. Higher education, we're about $162 now, just because we're going to have a smaller cohort there. We expect this number to go down to, originally about $30, $29 to be exact, over this period of time in state expenditures per person on higher education. Of course, there's some things that are changing in the higher education landscape these days too, with all the emphasis on the technical colleges. The College of Technology is the fastest growing piece of the University of Montana. We have the Gallatin College in Bozeman that's really the fastest growing part of our institution at MSU as well. So there's things like that going on these days. Okay, corrections is the third leg on this stool. In Montana, the latest numbers we had in 2012, we had about 2,500 people who were being held in county jails or in the, non-county jails, but in the Montana prison system, excluding county jails. Expenditures about $89 per person. Probation and parole, we had about 8,500 people out there. Youth services, only 133 young people in youth services, but the expenditures on these young people were really very high. We'll see that here in just a minute. Youth courts, about around 5,200 people involved in that, and then other adult services. So this is kind of the landscape for corrections. Far too many numbers that are on this, but this is the percentage of people in the population that have had some run-ins with the law where they're involved with corrections. Let's just take a look at a couple of these. Youth courts, almost about 8% of kids 14 to 17 have had some interaction with the Department of Justice in the youth court system. As you look across the bottom of this, this relatively high percentage of young people that have had some involvement, as you move out here, these numbers increase a little bit as we get into people, up to 25 to 44, about 3% of them, and then it begins to tail off. I used to do quite a bit of substance abuse work over at the Montana prison system. They used to tell me that after 45, people decided that they needed to change, and so maybe that's some of the impact that goes on here as well. As you move across these different groups of people, the expenditures per person really change a lot. This 14 to 17-year-old group is really expensive. And that's because these kids are being housed down at these inpatient facilities. In effect, they're down at Pine Hills or one of the other facilities in Montana. As we move out here, we get a little bit more expensive as we move into people that are interacting with the Montana prison system in some way. And then you get out here and you're really getting into kind of probation, parole sort of thing, or primarily probation, and so that the costs go down substantially. So how does this translate then into our demographic story that we're telling here? Well, we think that over this period of time, we ought to see corrections expenditures actually decline, at least based on the demographics that we look at. And again, spending about $166 right now per Montana, and probably that going down something in the range of about $20 as we go out to 2030. So all these stories up to now with education, with K-12 and higher education and corrections all look pretty positive in a way from a state appropriations perspective, because they're all requiring less money as we kind of move through time. Okay, now let's go ahead and take one that's going to break the mold here. Let's take a look at Medicaid. And again, too many numbers here, but let's just take a look at a couple of these. We spend about, this is with the state and federal contribution to Medicaid. This is the total of all the WACs. There's about $900 million or so a year that go to Medicaid. The state of Montana portion of that, and this has to be qualified a little bit, 2010 when we did this study was kind of an anomaly because the federal government with the under the stimulus that they provided came in and cut the Medicaid rate in the state by 10%. So the federal government picked up more of it and the state had to pick up less. So in Montana, we picked up about $200 million of that. In a normal year, we would have picked up about $300 million of that. So